The United States is already at war with Iran. Missiles have been exchanged, naval clashes have taken place, airstrikes have already happened. So the question now is no longer whether the two countries are fighting. The real question the entire world is asking is this: are we about to see American boots on the ground in Iran? Are we actually heading toward a full-scale invasion? Because fighting a war from the air is one thing. Invading a country is something completely different. And once you start looking at what an invasion of Iran would actually involve, the scale of the problem becomes very clear very quickly. So let's walk through it step by step. Because the idea of invading Iran sounds simple when you say it quickly. But when you break it down, it becomes one of the most difficult military operations imaginable. The first problem is logistics. If American troops crossed into Iran tomorrow, could they even be supplied? Because wars are not won by soldiers alone. They are won by supply chains. Every army in history lives and dies by its logistics. Armies do not just fight, they consume enormous amounts of fuel, ammunition, spare parts, food, medical supplies, and equipment every single day. And all of that has to come from somewhere. Iran is a huge country. It is roughly 4 times the size of Iraq. That means the distances involved in a ground invasion would be enormous. Once troops cross the border and start moving inland, the supply lines behind them begin stretching further and further. Every bullet, every missile, every tank shell, every liter of fuel, all of it has to travel hundreds of miles behind the front line, through ports, through airfields, along long roads that cut across difficult terrain. Those supply routes become the lifeline of the entire army. And once an army's supply routes become long enough, they become vulnerable. Ports can be targeted, airfields can be struck, convoys can be attacked along the roads, missiles can hit logistics hubs, and every disruption slows the advance. History is full of armies that advanced quickly at the beginning of a campaign, only to slow down when their supply chains started to struggle. Because when the fuel stops arriving, tanks stop moving. When ammunition stops arriving, guns fall silent. And when supplies stop reaching the front line, the entire army begins to stall. So, before anyone talks about invading Iran, the first question military planners have to answer is very simple. Can we keep an army supplied inside a country that large? Because if the answer is no, the invasion never happens. But logistics is only the first problem. The second problem is the terrain. Everyone talks about invading Iran, but almost nobody talks about the mountains. Iran is not a flat country. It is not open desert where armies can move freely. Running down the western side of Iran is the Zagros mountain range, a massive natural barrier stretching roughly 1,500 kilometers. If you look at a map, it forms a huge defensive wall across the country, and mountains change warfare completely. Large formations cannot move freely. Heavy vehicles struggle. Supply routes get squeezed into narrow valleys and winding mountain roads, and that changes the nature of the entire conflict. Because instead of advancing across wide open ground, invading forces are forced into predictable paths. They have to move through passes, through valleys, through narrow routes where there are only a few roads available, and predictable paths create choke points, places where defenders can wait, places where ambushes can happen, places where smaller defending forces can slow down a much larger army. Throughout history, mountain warfare has trapped invading armies in long, grinding conflicts. Because the defenders know the terrain, they know the routes, they know the high ground, and the attackers are constantly exposed. Even a powerful army can find itself slowed down dramatically when fighting through mountain ranges. That is why military planners worry far less about reaching Iran, and far more about what happens once an army enters those mountains. Because getting into the country may be possible, but moving through it is another matter entirely. Then comes the next question. Even if an army entered Iran, how long could the war actually last? Because history gives us some uncomfortable lessons. The Iran-Iraq War lasted 8 years. 8 years of brutal fighting between two large armies. The Iraq War began very quickly. Baghdad fell in just a few weeks. But the insurgency that followed lasted for years afterwards. And Afghanistan? That war lasted 20 years, 2 decades. This is one of the hardest truths about modern warfare. Wars often begin quickly, but they end very slowly. The opening phase of a war can move very fast, but controlling a country afterwards is something completely different. Because wars do not end just because an army reaches a capital city. They end when resistance stops, and resistance can continue for years. Local militias, regional fighters, small groups carrying out attacks, pressure on supply lines, endless small confrontations that slowly wear down an invading force. Wars today are rarely decided in days. They are decided by endurance, by which side can stay in the fight the longest, by which side can absorb the losses and keep going, and by which country still has the political will to continue paying the cost of the war. Because war is not just about weapons, it is about willpower. And that leads us to the final question, one that very few people are asking. If invading Iran is this difficult, maybe nobody actually plans to invade it at all. Because modern warfare does not always mean occupation. Sometimes the strategy is pressure, air power striking repeatedly, economic sanctions tightening around the economy, naval forces controlling key sea routes, proxy conflicts spreading pressure across an entire region. Instead of conquering a country, the strategy becomes isolating it, surrounding it, and slowly increasing the pressure until something breaks. In geopolitics, the objective is not always territory. Sometimes the objective is exhaustion. Sometimes the objective is simply to weaken an opponent over time. So when people talk about American boots on the ground in Iran, the reality may be more complicated than that, because invading Iran would mean supplying an army across enormous distances. It would mean fighting through mountain ranges that favor the defenders. And it could mean entering a war that lasts years, possibly even decades. That is why the decision to invade is never taken lightly. Because once a country crosses that border, there is no easy way back. And that is why the most important decision in this entire conflict has not happened yet. The decision to invade. The war has already begun, but the moment that could change everything is whether anyone decides to put boots on the ground in Iran.